Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Mark Colaluca. I work a little bit of security at Viasat. And I would say if you had told me a couple of years ago that I'd be on the stage talking publicly about an incident, I probably would have said something's up. And that incident got a lot of notice from really big press organizations and lots of other entities. I'd say something really is up. But to be on stage next to NSA, I would have said I made a bad career choice somewhere a few years ago. So this is our opportunity to talk about our partnership, some details about the incident, and some lessons learned from that. So Kristina?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So I am Kristina Walter. I am from the No Such Agency, National Security Agency. I'm currently the director of the Future Ready Workforce Initiative at NSA, which is really designed to recruit and retain cyber and STEM talent at NSA. But at the time of this attack, I was the chief of Defense Industrial-Based Cybersecurity within NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. So we're really excited to be here to talk to you today.
Cool. A little bit of the agenda, what we're planning on talking about. Just a brief overview of Viasat, the actual KSAT satellite and the network, just because there's a wide variety of knowledge about the satellite industry and that particular network. So I'll try and run through that pretty quick. Then Kristina will talk about the CCC, an overview of what they do, how they engage with DIB, defense, and the partnerships. Then we're going to talk about the attacks, and that is plural. So we're going to talk about some things that we haven't yet discussed publicly about both the modem wiper attack as well as some other network-based attacks. We'll go into our incident response and information sharing lessons learned between the two of us just through this process, what we learned both as we went through the incident response, but also some of our information sharing lessons learned. Kristina will then kind of dive into what did they take from our technical and forensic information that we provided, and what did the CCC do post our incident investigation. And finally, we'll share some lessons learned about remediation, mitigation, kind of future-proofing satellite networks. And we will take Q&A for the ones that we can answer. So really quick, KSAT is a Ka-band satellite, covers a lot of Europe, both Eastern and Western Europe, and a little bit of the Middle East. It was launched in December 2010. It serves both broadband and satellite TV. The attack targeted the broadband customers, so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And as of the date of the attack, there's roughly 110 or 120,000 commercial modems active on the network. How a satellite works, this is just a really basic picture, just so everybody can think about, as we go through, we're going to be mentioning some of these elements, and I want to make sure everybody understands. So from left to right, think of left as the subscriber. Customer premise equipment plugs into a modem or a router. There's a dish on a house. You send RF signals up to a satellite. It comes down to a big giant dish called a gateway. There's 10 of those with KSAT. And from that gateway to a fiber network to a big data center where the core node has management of modems, the control plane to let modems in and out of the network, as well as the egress to the internet for the subscriber to surf. And specifically with KSAT, if you look on the left side, there were collections of those beams that I showed on the first chart that were, so we built some segmentation when the network was first deployed. So there were BAP1 and BAP2, basically the broadband access points where the egress to the internet, but some subscribers were in one, some were another, mostly based on geographic alignment. And you see at the bottom there was kind of a separate one that was special purpose built for our commercial aviation and some government customers. And so that's kind of the subscriber layout over there. And once you get to the core node side, you can see we had a partner operating the network for BAP1 and BAP2, and there was a Viasat-operated section for the government and commercial aviation. That'll become relevant as we go through the attacks. Okay?
So let me talk a little bit about the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. Public-private partnerships is a bit of an overused phrase, so we're going to talk about what that actually meant for the two of us and how we were able to work together. So we talk a little bit about the National Security Agency. We've existed for the last 70 years doing foreign intelligence missions, really focused on nation-state cyber actors, understanding their tactics, techniques, and procedures, how they want to attack networks, what they want to accomplish in that space. But we're also a combat support agency. So another significant portion of our mission is securing military communications. And we recognize that if we want to secure Department of Defense and US government systems, we need to work with the private industry. Those systems are generally built, operated, and maintained by our industry partners. And so we have really great insight into who these actors are, what they potentially want to steal, but we don't have any insight into how they're actually targeting industry networks because, well, they're industry networks, so we don't need them. But what we recognized was in order to fully understand how these attacks are happening across US government, DoD, and DIB networks, it happens through partnerships. And so about 3 years ago, in December of 2020, we opened the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. Nothing like opening a collaboration center in the middle of a pandemic. But we learned very quickly that we could pivot and partner virtually just as effectively as we could in person. And so the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center stood up so that we could bring our technical expertise, our analysts who really understand foreign nation state actors and really understand how to secure and exploit networks in collaboration with industry. And industry brings in their net defenders. And when we bring those people together, we can do a couple things. One, we can understand sophisticated campaigns much quicker. Two, we can respond faster by sharing that information out. And three, we can really tailor mitigations to address the most sophisticated of threats that we see and get those out to the broader community with our interagency partners. So that was what we were designed to do when we stood at the Collaboration Center, but we weren't really sure how that would work. But what we're going to talk through today is how that worked in a particular attack, but generally how we worked with our partnerships. We partner with the defense industrial base and the entire ecosystem of the defense industrial base, specifically on nation-state threats. So this partnership had existed, I think about 3 years now. It was something that we were collaborating with their teams on. Our analysts and Mark's team collaborated daily in virtual and in-person meetings. And so we've collaborated up into the attack, during the attack, and we continue to collaborate today.
Okay, with that, let's talk a little bit about, go over the two attack overview and a little bit of the timeline. There's been a lot of open source reporting, and our incident report plus that open source reporting has caused some confusion. So this is an attempt to simplify just for folks in the room. Remember when I said that core node in Turin, Italy, where a lot of the management and control plane stack is? So there's a VPN concentrator sitting at the edge. It's used for access to that network to provide the network operators and administrators trusted access into the network. So starting about 5, 6 o'clock the evening before on the 23rd, we, forensic analysis and investigation determined that through a Tor network across the internet, attempts were made to log into this VPN appliance. And those attempts actually failed. There were several sets of credentials that were tried and failed. About an hour later, there was a successful unauthorized access through that VPN, which landed inside the core node, but nothing happened. The attackers stayed resident with the session active, but didn't do anything for about another 2 hours. In about 2 hours, so this is about 2100 UTC, a management server that was in place inside the core node was accessed with a different set of credentials, hence the coloring difference there. And from that point, over the next 3 to 4 hours, the attackers did a couple of things. One, they went to a network operations server that was present there, and its primary purpose was modem diagnostics, modem health, how many modems are online. So that server had access to all the modems in the network in those two partitions. And they did recon work. They ended up looking for particular sets of modems. They tested to see how many modems were online. And then about an hour later, right about midnight, they accessed the FTP server. This part of the infrastructure is actually placed in a position where it could deliver new software updates or images to the modems. However, they didn't use any of that capability other than the place in the network. They dropped a toolkit on there. That toolkit included a set of scripts to enumerate the network, to interrogate the network, to report back status after the execution of the scripts were done, and a wiper binary targeted at the MIPS processor on our modems. And so from there, basically send out over the next 3 to 4 hours, which you'll see here in the impact, over the air, those commands, technically placing that toolkit on each of the terminals and executing the binary to wipe the flash memory in the modem. And upon reboot, the modem would be inoperable. That all took about 45 minutes on that. So if you look at this picture here, you'll see just about 0300, you'll see this gradual decline of terminals. But you see the precipitous drop about, I believe it was like 415 to 430 UTC. And from that one segment, we lost about 40 to 45,000 modems total. You also see the long tail on that. What was happening was modems that the reboot command wasn't always successful on those modems, but when the subscriber rebooted, or as you'll see here in a minute, there was operational instability due to another attack, modems were forced offline and did not come back. So that's essentially the impact that we saw right there. This gradual tail is just pointing that out again, as we're going to talk about a second attack variant that we believe to be the cause of that slight drop in modem count. Okay, this also is a traffic graph, and two things I want to point out here. Same thing about, you can see the drop right there about 415 to 430, where pretty much traffic goes to zero as a bunch of modems go offline. There's some noise traffic in there as well, and just some normal traffic, so the drop is precipitous. The other one I wanted to point out was, is this drop here. We're going to talk about an operational issue that right in the heat of battle with incident response, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So this is then a couple of hours after, and I'm on the phone with operations folks in Europe, and we're going to talk about that whole process here in a minute, but I'm on the line with Kristina originally, and so this is the email you never really want to get. And one thing to notice when she sent it, this is Central Time, by the way, I'm in Austin, and the expectation that I am there in a minute to collaborate or sync told me something probably was up. And so
I will have you know that Mark and I were communicating hours before this, and this meeting invite was just to solidify the collaboration. But leading up to the invasion of Ukraine, we were tracking that there would be specific industry partners that may be targeted. We were really thinking, who are lethal aid builders and providers to Ukraine, that their supply chains might be taken down. This was not something we were expecting. So when I got a message from Mark at about 8 o'clock, I think we have a problem, can we sync? You can see we responded fairly quickly. And so within a couple hours, we were on the phone with Mark's team, with our technical experts, talking about what they were seeing, what was happening on the ground, and everybody was still trying to figure out what was happening. So while Mark and his team were really focused on incident response and customer recovery, we were trying to answer really 3 questions. 1, what happened and who did it? 2, are other systems that we depend on as the United States government going to be vulnerable to a similar attack? And 3, can we get out mitigations that are specific to this attack as quickly as possible to the community?
So as part of that, I'm going to show the second part of the attack stuff that we learned later, but we shared most of the incident analysis that we had to date with Kristina and her team. But we didn't have any modems in hand because these were in Europe. We couldn't analyze the hardware. We had a third party operating the network. So we didn't have telemetry on our own in some cases. And the nature of this relationship, our distributors and the folks who actually sell the service and install the service have the relationship with end customers. So in many cases, we're a bit of an arm's length from the actual end user to get reports back from the field. The second thing we noticed, though, is you'll see starting at 0302 there. I apologize for the graph, but I think it shows we started seeing a set of modems, legitimate subscriber modems, MAC addresses legitimately provisioned with legal, service plans that have been paid for across a wide variety of beams, not just in a particular region, start acting in this way. And essentially, that attack turned into something like this. You have a terminal that's on the network, and they exploited a couple of things within our system that were susceptible to specifically crafted DHCP packets or just a pure volume of traffic. So the first thing we saw right there, remember that little arrow I showed you with an operational instability? We're getting flooded with DHCP requests, thousands and thousands, over 100,000 in a 5-minute span, and it was just overwhelming our DHCP relay and DHCP servers, such that any subscriber that needed to renew their lease or happened to get kicked off the network and tried to get back on wouldn't get an answer from the server. So we put in some really quick mitigations in place for that. The second thing we saw is, that's my attempt to show somebody kicking, is these terminals would send specially crafted packets to say, take that terminal off the network, specifically targeting terminals to have them eject themselves from the network. And when we put a mitigation in for that one in place, the third one was kind of on behalf of. They started using some really, I'd say, very highly technical knowledge of our network and how DHCP and network entry and AAA is used to try and target specific terminals to not let them back on the network. There's going to be a talk tomorrow at 11 o'clock at DEF CON, track 3, that has a lot of the reverse engineering on the modem side, the dump of the flash memory, the reverse of the script and the toolkits, as well as protocol and packet level discussion of some of the DHCP stuff, if you're interested. So with that, that's the kind of information that we technically and forensically were sharing with Kristina's time pretty much real time. Okay, so I want to pause for a second and go to a lesson learned. The first one is, for many organizations, incident response is the most neglected muscle group. And part of what we experienced was a really complicated ecosystem. And here's a picture of a modem with a light on, doesn't boot. And you've got distributors and salespeople telling you, well, if you power it off and power it back on in 5 minutes, I think they're coming back online. You got satellite people and server people going, I see modems entering the network. I'm not sure what happened. We've never done this kind of exercise as a tabletop with all these different groups. It's usually security people and a few friends of security that do these exercises. And now you factor in many of those people were in different countries with a language barrier, or those distributors that aren't your employees, and you're trying to get people to coordinate pretty rapidly and validate information. And then, of course, you get security people coming in. I want to see this log. I want to do that thing. I want to do this thing. And we might not have access to it. The server might be down or dead. It just made for a pretty chaotic scene at the beginning. There was still some question whether this was an operational hiccup. Did a change go wrong, or was this a security event? So this was me hitting the stop button about 8 o'clock when I called Kristina and said, we've severed connection to the management planes for all Viasat networks worldwide. And we just decided we didn't know the extent. We didn't know the attackers were targeting other networks. We didn't know which ones were vulnerable. We didn't even know what had actually happened. So we made the operations folks really unhappy because you're trying to troubleshoot and triage, and I just took your access away. But we kind of had a suspicion that the management network was being used to interact with modems in a not so great way for us. And so we did that. We began our incident response process, which includes engaging Mandiant as our third-party incident response and forensics provider. But this whole group of people and those set of actions and these things, we hadn't practiced these. So our first lesson, the good part, we had exercised the muscle memory with them and knew exactly how to engage, what they would be looking for, how to communicate with them, how they could feed stuff back if there was other intelligence or reporting that might affect us. That muscle had been exercised, and so our lesson is exercising these other groups and other muscles as well. A second lesson for us, information sharing. It's important, it's complex, it's both. We have subscribers, residential subscribers that want to know, where's my service? We had a wind farm, a big, large wind farm that depended on this service unbeknownst to us. We had commercial airlines all over the world. It was our network. We have government networks all around the world. Is our network impacted? Is it at risk? We have our relationships with ISACs. That's one of our preferred, trusted methods of sharing with our industry partners, as well as our competitors sometimes. They all wanted an update, each one, national defense or aviation. We had foreign government entities and security and intelligence services I've never even met. I don't speak their language, and they're asking for hourly updates. So what we ended up doing was, Viasat, we're the primary conduit for our customers and our partners, and relying on the CCC to be our primary conduit for all US government entities as well as foreign government or allied partners. And that worked really well, and I think Kristina is going to talk a little bit about what she ended up and her team ended up doing with the information that we shared and what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, so a little bit about what we did. So we talk a lot with our partners about there is no cyber 911. If something happens, who do I really call? And what we like to say is call the partner you're comfortable with. We had an established relationship. You can't surge trust in a crisis. Our analysts knew each other, Mark and I knew each other, and so when this happened, we could quickly just get together and not build that relationship from scratch. So what were we able to do? Mark was feeding us technical artifacts of their investigation. Our analysts were able to do some independent analysis to really help Mark and his team confirm what they thought they knew. But as mentioned, there were boots on the ground, were not where Mandy and Viasat was, and so they weren't really sure if everything was accurate. And we could take our independent analysis and say, that attack vector looks correct, that's consistent with TTPs that we see the actors using, we believe they move laterally in the same way, and could really confirm that independent analysis. The second thing we could do is we could bring in our technical experts. So that is our bread and butter. We have technical experts who really understand how to exploit and harden VSAT communications and VSAT networks. And so when we can put those together with Viasat, we could give really specific recommendations for both attacks that they were seeing on how to mitigate them. So they could really focus on their customers, and we could focus on that technical analysis and giving recommendations. The other thing that was really important to the US government was understanding who was behind this attack. And so one of the biggest parts of this was when we have technical information of the actual attack, when we can partner with allies and other US government partners, we could develop a really strong attribution. And so you saw on May 10th, the US government and NATO partners were able to publicly attribute the attack to Russia, and that was based off the collaboration that we were able to do really, really quickly. The other thing that Mark talked about is Mark really wanted to focus on incident response. He could not be handling a lot of questions from all of these different organizations and customers at the same time. So we really stepped in there. I mentioned the Cyber 911. We've been working hard with interagency partners to build that muscle memory so that you don't have to talk to several agencies and you can talk to us and we will make sure they're informed. So we started daily calls with our CISA, FBI, and interagency colleagues to share everything we knew. And so as we were getting technical artifacts and coming to conclusions in that space, we could share that out so that we could make sure that as a US government, when we had tailored mitigation guidance that we could send out to the broader community, it was coordinated, everybody knew it was coming, and they could help us amplify that guidance out to the broader community.
So some of that learning that we shared to pass on to interagency partners as well as other foreign government entities and even with the information sharing ISACs, this one is not rocket science. I'm going to insult this crowd's intelligence level, but the attack sophistication that's required is pretty proportional to the hygiene of the network. In some cases, it was very sophisticated and had a deep understanding of how our network worked. In other cases, they took great advantage of the tools and capabilities that were in place to execute the attack without having to do much on their own. So this is kind of like the eat your vegetables, brush your teeth, kind of go to the gym to stay healthy stuff. But we kind of adapted that to, okay, what else could we have done even if the hygiene was perfect or nearly perfect? And this one for us is knowing what normal is. And I say that because many of the actions in the toolkit and the movement of the attacker through the network mimicked what network operators and administrators were doing on a daily basis. If you followed that one path that I had, it was the exact path that an administrator would do on a not call escalation in the middle of the night to go do modem diagnostics. So what wasn't normal was probably transferring of files in toolkits or doing it at scale. And so that is something that we've learned is that documenting what normal is and having a nuanced look at what it should be and not. The second, for us, the intersections of our zones of trust, we watch those vigilantly now. And so anything that interacts with a terminal, even if it's just read-only or telemetry-based, is a place where we want to understand very precisely what's happening. Those DHCP attacks is a good example of lots of manipulation in the control plane that ordinarily wouldn't be watched. You trust the modem, it's got the right certificate, it comes into the network, it's got a valid subscription. You just expect DHCP to behave as its RFC protocol is defined. And so those crossings where you cross those planes between control plane or management plane, or for service providers with large numbers of edge devices, that's a really important part. Which leads us to the third part, which this enhanced monitoring and network segmentation for device access. This is something that older satellite networks just don't have a lot of right now. And building that in is a little difficult to shoehorn that into a network that was designed close to 15 years ago. But that was one of our biggest lessons learned, is that the part of the attack that didn't require a ton of sophistication, with a little bit more hygiene and a few extra things, probably can be mitigated.
Yeah. And this is where we, within 2 weeks of sharing the information with Viasat, published mitigation guidance to our partners at TLP Amber. So we had many SATCOM partners. We did expand our portfolio of SATCOM companies. But at the time, we were really getting pushed to push out mitigation guidance and tell us about this really sophisticated attack. And as Mark described, eating your vegetables and brushing your teeth was an important part of it. So within 2 weeks, we did publish guidance that said, understand your internet-facing devices and remove ones that don't have to be. Make sure that MFA is enabled across the board. Make sure that you understand your network architecture. Mark said a lot of the activity they were seeing was consistent with what a normal admin would do. We see this a lot. We see nation-state actors living off the land and performing like normal users and normal admins, and so it's really hard to identify them. So it's really important to understand your network, have logging turned on, and understand what's normal so that you can identify what's abnormal. Network segmentation, your operational and management networks shouldn't be connected. Lessons learned that we were able to take from this particular attack and share those out. We also then publicly put out, with CISA and our other partners, a securing VSAT communication guide. We had updated it based off of lessons learned because we wanted to make sure that the broadest population could have access to the mitigation guidance that we were able to develop together.
And so the other part of this, after the hygiene got better and some immediate mitigation stuff, the attack sophistication did get higher. The DHCP stuff that, again, a colleague of mine, Nick Saunders, will talk about tomorrow at DEF CON, clearly responded to mitigation and remediation tactics with more advanced techniques to try and continue the attack. Just this year, we've had several incidents in the RF domain where the adversaries had to pivot because of the hygiene, and the health of the network, if you will, has improved. Which leads us to number 4, which this is a little bit about feedback that Viasat would get from either customers or industry or press about, hey, why don't you do a zero trust network? And I was looking for a zero trust icon that most of them are from vendors that are here, and I didn't want to do that. So I made my own. So this is not a real company, but it's like, that's an okay kind of guiding light or North Star for you to go for. It's really hard to do in old networks. And it's also really hard to do when, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that we did to enable zero trust-like things, but I'm going to talk about how hard it was to do. For example, let's go to like the identity of a terminal. Do you care where the terminal is coming from? What about an admin coming over a Tor network? Are you sure that doesn't sound good? What about an admin coming from a different IP? What about a workstation whose certificate doesn't match what you expect it to be? So upgrading that to validate the provenance of the terminal or the devices behind it is one area we put a lot of investment in. The second, this secure admin workspace, is using those management servers that you saw in the previous slides as a place to do administrative work when really they should be performing their function, network monitoring or terminal software updates. And so providing a different trusted place for that secure admin to work. And combining that with kind of ephemeral least privilege, like it's only there for the time that you need it, the workstations themselves or the privilege that's granted to it. And finally, probably the toughest one for us on the terminal side is actually contextualizing and validating what actions they're taking. So if you go back to the DHCP behavior, there are legitimate cases where we see a CPE behind a modem sending a couple hundred DHCP requests a minute. There's valid use cases for that. And we broke some customers when we just applied some brute force rate limiting. And so really understanding the action and what that terminal's doing and why was super important for us. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Final comments just on things that we've done, and I've covered most of those, but I wanted to highlight the bullet on the bottom about building out these zones of trust and being okay as a security professional with breaking normal operations as a way to learn what normal is. We found it really extremely difficult, especially on older networks, to find out what normal behavior was and who was using it. And so implementing something a bit more draconian to understand both attacker actions as well as what normal is was pretty important for us. Okay. With that, we'll take any questions.
so you know we can't see you. So if you're
it's hard to see. Sorry.
Hi. Can you elaborate a little bit on the nature of the modems that were targeted in that second phase of the attack? You were saying that the newly disclosed portion of this attack, that the attackers grew more sophisticated and were trying to employ methods to try to keep modems from coming back online.
Yep.
What were those modems that were being targeted to be prevented from coming back online?
So the majority, I assume you're talking about the DHCP attacks that were targeting the modems. Yeah, I'd say the majority of those modems were in certain specific regions or with certain customer groups and certain functions. It appeared to be that the attackers had specific targets in mind. However, we did some pretty deep analysis trying to find out if there was correlation between those. And at this time, I don't have a good answer for your question on what the targeting was, if there was a subset of a particular region or a particular customer set. It appears it was, but we don't have that answer. We'll go this way, I guess.
Sure, thank you. So I appreciate the talk, really interesting incident response discussion. I look forward to the technical discussion tomorrow. But I actually have a question for the NSA representative here, because we don't get to ask too many questions to the NSA. Right, we attributed this attack to a nation state, to Russia. That came at considerable cost, of course, to Viasat and to a lot of federal customers and allied customers. So what's the so what? Like, what instruments of national power can the U.S. government use to discourage similar attacks in the future?
Yeah, I will say, did you notice that Mark walked really far away from me when I said that? Because that was coordinated. He wanted to be out of camera shot. So what we were really trying to do at the time is, once we could identify that they were specifically doing certain things, we could implement sanctions and look at what we could do to try to punish Viasat. Or not Viasat, sorry. Viasat's great. Russia. And
right,
so
now I'm walking away.
When we did that, now you can keep going. You can go off stage if you want. So when you saw that May 10th announcement, it came with a second round of sanctions on Russia. And we've seen that those were actually effective in kind of financially burdening the country. And so that was what we were trying to inform policymakers to do, so that they could make those strategic decisions as to how we wanted to support Ukraine in the invasion.
Okay, thank you.
Center?
Thank you. First of all, I'm pretty sure I'm part of one of the governments that bothered you a lot, or at least, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you have any lessons learned about informing or talking with the public about the incident, because in my experience, Viasat was something that was very abstract to the public and got them very nervous, especially in the climate we had. Yeah, that's it.
So I'll start with that answer, but then I'll let Kristina add to it. I think in our information sharing, that's the complex part. And one of our lessons learned is having probably a better playbook during an incident or event, depending on, is the vulnerability that was exploited or the attack something that is relevant to other satellite providers. Like, we shared quite a bit of information privately with other SATCOM providers. But to your point, our playbook for the public and our relationship with our distributors, our retailers and stuff, we could certainly improve the amount of information about what Viasat is, what we're doing on the attack, our response to customers in terms of, we were directed customer communications quite a bit about when they're going to have replacement modems and when service would be restored. But I think one of the lessons learned for me is including those public-facing statements, especially in regions where we're not typically operating as the retailer, is pretty important.
Yeah, and I would say on our side, when you're going to publicly attribute something like this to a nation state, you really want to be sure that you have it right. And so you want to coordinate with anybody in allied and industry who might have more information about it before you make a statement like that. And so we had that muscle memory built, but we also wanted to be really specific about how much of an alarm we were going to sound. As Mark talked about, mitigation guidance that we've published previously was fairly consistent with some of the things that would have prevented something like this, with the uniqueness of some of the DHCP stuff. But so we wanted to make sure that our mitigation guidance was relevant, but was also not sounding alarms for people who might not be impacted when this was specific to KSAT networks.
Yep. Okay, go back there.
So, quick question. Obviously, you remove the people from your network and so forth and so on and fix the systems. Can you talk just for a few seconds about steps you took to make sure that A, they don't come back, or B, that they're not there somewhere else?
Great question. So for us, part of Mandiant's engagement with us, combined with our team, performed an independent compromise assessment, not only on that network, but on other networks of ours worldwide to make sure there wasn't anything else resident or latent that we missed. And second, I guess alluding to the fact that, for example, the DHCP attacks continued for several weeks, and we've seen some additional attacks this year, we fully expect them to come back. And so part of the other mitigation that we did as Viasat, we ended up transferring this set of services to a brand new infrastructure as part of our operating agreement with SkyLogic finished. And so we've kind of rebuilt a whole ton of infrastructure from scratch over the last 6 months.
So I have a question. Oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
okay. So do you think if you pen test that scenario, that could have been that it wouldn't happen? Pen testers tell me they're powerful, so I'm just asking. You know, I don't know. I mean, they said they can find stuff. I just want to ask for your opinion.
So my short answer is yes. Additional testing on legacy networks would have been beneficial to highlight some of the issues that were still resident from a pretty old network. I would say from a lesson learned perspective, and you'll hear a little bit about this tomorrow in the technical talk, of some of our modem-based and terminal-based test methodologies have been, I'd say, enhanced because of this incident.
Okay.
And I'd add, nation-state actors are humans, and humans will go after the lowest common denominator. The easiest way to get in is the way that they will get in. And so a pen tester can help you highlight some of those internet-facing devices you might not know, or unpatched systems, and alert you to some of those hygiene items that would have helped secure your network and harden your network.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I guess I was curious. You mentioned the initial unauthorized access through the VPN and then the various accounts that were used. Was that brute force or default passwords, or how was that initial access gained?
So neither us nor Mandiant nor NSA can confirm exactly. The leader in the clubhouse is a set of compromised credentials. Does not appear to be brute force. We don't have any forensic evidence of that. Does not appear to be default password, nor does it appear to be exploitation of unknown zero-day or anything else within the VPN appliance. Okay?
Over here.
Incidentally, that was the same question I had, but given your answer, did you do any sort of internal investigation for insider threats?
Yes. So it was a pretty exhaustive investigation on pretty much all facets of the things that we found, which included a detailed review of personnel and normal actions and behaviors. So the answer is yes. Go ahead, your turn.
Hi, thanks so much. Katrina Manson at Bloomberg News.
I recognize you.
Hey, it's me.
Couple of sets of questions for both of you. Kristina, some governments actually identified the GRU. I know the US didn't publicly identify the GRU. Can you talk about how you make those decisions and just that process of actually figuring out it was Russia? You talked about some joint discussions. And then you mentioned sanctions. That second round of sanctions did not spell out that it was in retaliation for the Viasat hack. And I know there had been discussion within the administration about separating it. I think New Zealand actually did talk about doing something separate. Can you talk about whether you think in future it would be more useful to make those sanctions very, very clearly linked? I don't think they were as clearly linked as you suggested just now, unless I have that wrong. And then, are you now doing the tabletops that you mentioned? Do you have a better sense of your ecosystem? It's fascinating to hear you.
People love me now, Katrina. So they love seeing a meeting invite from me and like, do I? So the short answer is yes. And it's also included our distributors and third-party partners too. We have done a couple of these for different networks where where Viasat does not wholly own and operate internally. We've done 2 of those so far.
As far as your questions for me, so I can't speak to policymakers' decisions of timing of when they're going to release sanctions versus attribution of a specific attack. As far as how we kind of to come to the conclusion that it was a specific entity, that's where all the technical forensics are really important. So when we understand malware strains that are used by certain organizations, that's how we can tie together the technical artifacts that we get from industry or from allied partners with what we know to be TTPs of specific actors to tie that attribution together.
And the sanctions you mentioned?
I said I can't speak to the timing of that. That's something that's just not done by the NSA, and it's done
just
by
as a clarification, my understanding was that those sanctions weren't explicitly linked to the Viasat hack, but I think you said they were, so I just want to be...
The timing of them was at the same time, so it helped policymakers inform it, was the timeline.
Okay, thanks so much.
Go for it.
Good afternoon. With how the attack took place and changed over the time of its execution, can you give perspective as to whether or not you link that to one ABT or a multiple of ABTs, specifically tied to the Russian state? And overall, does that change your perspective with their targeting methodology for critical infrastructure?
Do you want to go first, and then I'll give you the technical answer if you want. So from an attacker perspective, we don't do attribution. We saw distinct modem-based, wiper-based deployment attack. We see distinct DHCP attacks, and this year we've seen some distinct RF activity. So I just call them attackers. I have no idea about same or similar.
And you know, we are tracking different groups that are nation-state actors and how they perform their operations and try to get as much mitigation guidance out as possible. So there's a lot of TLP clear cybersecurity advisories that we're publishing out with our partners at CISA that walk through specific techniques used by specific actors. And so as we understand more, we try to get those out to the broader community to make sure critical infrastructure is also aware of the TTPs we see.
Thank you.
Hi. What steps have been taken since the attack to better communicate with our allies that may have had a language barrier before? And have there been any efforts to identify potential victims of this that were not necessarily affected badly this time so that we could bring them in on the transparency in the future of another attack?
From a customer perspective or from a partner perspective?
There were a number of foreign agencies that were apparently calling y'all in, and you were not able to communicate with them efficiently as to what exactly happened, if my memory serves from the...
Sure. So I'll take part of that, but then maybe I confused you. So within the first hours of the attack, we're getting calls in from foreign intelligence agencies or foreign governments asking for updates, and in many cases, Viasat didn't speak the language. Our operator, SkyLogic, did. And so we had a communication, I'd say, hurdle in the first couple of hours trying to get standardized communications out to foreign governments and foreign entities, which is why we channeled that through Kristina.
Yeah, and we have established partnerships with allied partners with other government agencies, and so that's why we kind of led that on Mark's behalf so that we could make sure that they were informed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One more?
Sir, my name is Corey Reedy. I'm part of the atmospheric early warning system. So I kind of have some same concerns with my radar system after that balloon floated across the country. We're trying to figure out how to harden our system as well. I would like to take some lessons learned from you, what industry standards that you use to kind of harden your system, you know, taking account to insider threat, et cetera. And there's some other questions as well. I'll talk with you one-on-one.
Happy to talk offline and share as much as we can. We ended up starting with kind of a CIS benchmark on some of the terminal side stuff. And because we're a defense contractor and part of our business, NIST 800-171 set of controls for us was appropriate because our network is shared use, both commercial and government. But I'm happy to share with you those and exactly how we prioritized which actions based on what we saw.
Awesome. I'll look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, please
Thank you.
Feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned twice now an RF attack. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to give much more detail on that because that's still an ongoing investigation.
Okay, I think that's it.
Is that it?
Okay.
Thank you.